Hi, everybody. My name is Pete Malinverni, and first I want to thank Gal for having me on this wonderful stream today, and I want to thank Milan for her help. Um, Milan is an assistant stage manager at Princeton in the acting program there. So Gail knows smart people. and Milan, I was chatting with her a little, and she says she does a lot of mentorship in her work there at Princeton. And I have to say uh, that mentorship has sort of become a key part of how I conduct my life, really. Um, I'll tell you about myself a little bit. First of all, I want to let you know that if I'm looking at the comments, so if anyone would like to, ask any questions, have anything to say, please feel free to do that. More than happy to engage in that way. We have about a half an hour together. So I'll just get started and tell you a little bit about who I am. I grew up in Niagara Falls, New York. And I grew up, my dad was a construction worker, worked as a pipe fitter, steam fitter, as a union worker in the chemical plants there in Niagara Falls. My mom was a homemaker, and they wanted, as all parents do, right? They wanted the best for me. And part of that was to arrange for me to have piano lessons from the young age of 6. And my teacher then was a super tough love type of teacher. She was a Polish immigrant who had learned piano in the Russian school, which means, a real strict adherence to the basic rules of technical proficiency at the instrument, so which meant lots of finger exercises and scales and blah, blah, blah. And then a lot of, really difficult music. And as I stayed with this woman from when I was 6 until I got out of high school. So it was a lot of years of that very strict training. The kind of thing you realize when you grow up, right, that you didn't quite have a handle on when you're younger, was the fact that if you're studying, saxophone or violin or whatever, you go to school and you sit in a section with other saxophonists or trumpet players or violinists or whatever it is, right? So you develop friendships, camaraderie with your fellow musicians. Well, if you're studying classical piano, that doesn't happen unless you're studying in a studio where your teacher is having recitals all the time and blah, blah, blah. You don't know any other people who study classical piano. And that was certainly my case growing up. And I think that had played a large part in why I resisted it at a certain point, taking lessons. I was, I showed skill, I showed talent, I guess. And so it was going well, but, it just, I wanted to go out and play ball, whatever it was, but no, you got to practice, right? So I would practice, and then finally I could go outside and, play ball, whatever I wanted to do. And it wasn't until I was in high school and I got a band together with a cousin of mine and some friends, cousin Paul Chido, a great guitarist, and I had a little band together. And then we started, making our rehearsals and playing school dances and whatnot. And that's when I finally got the feeling of what it was to be a fellow musician. It was wonderful, so that's when I really started to have fun with the music. But of course, the problem was that it was, we were playing funk and rock and like that, which is great. But unfortunately, I think young musicians in that style don't learn really how to modulate their dynamics. And so it was quite loud all the time, and it never felt like, on one hand, I'm studying Chopin and Bach and whatever. So I'm developing these skills at the instrument. And then I go and playing with the band. It doesn't matter because it can't be heard, right? So that was sort of this thing was how much I loved being with the people in the band and driving to the gig and setting up our equipment and looking at it and saying, wow, doesn't that look cool, right? But we got these refrigerator sized amps. um, so that was great, but it wasn't kind of, I didn't feel like I don't know, I didn't have quite the creative outlet I wanted. On the other hand, I'm playing classical piano and I'm able to do all this stuff at the instrument, but you got to play the notes on the page. There's no, every time I would try to like play something a little differently, my teacher would close the book and point to the front of it and say, when your name is there, then you can do what you want, where the composer's name was. So I went away to school, music school. And well, first, when I was in senior in high school, I played the Rhapsody in Blue with my high school concert band, and that was great. I learned the piece, memorized the piece, and all, and played it with that group, and it was just wonderful, to really work hard on something and then be able to perform it on piano, not on the electric piano I was playing in the band with. And I started to listen. There was a radio station from Buffalo. Again, I'm from Niagara Falls, New York. There was a radio station in Buffalo where they played jazz. And I started to hear, yeah, that's it. Because I can tell these people can play. But I can also tell that there's a rhythmic feeling and a sort of let's see what happens kind of an ethos with it. And so when I went to music school, as I said, I was walking down the hallway one time and I heard these people playing in a room. And that was the first time I really heard it live. And, I knocked open the door and went in and met these musicians who were playing jazz music. And it had that mix of facility at the instrument, but the ability to kind of converse and see what would happen, right? And as jazz musicians, we are, I think, some of the only musicians who are both performer and composer at the same time. So the performer part, all right, you get up and if you're lucky not to be stricken with stage fright, which luckily I'm not, then what are you going to play? You can kind of set certain things up, what tunes you're going to play. Maybe you can work on the arrangements, but you don't really know how it's going to go. And that's kind of the beauty of it. Not even kind of, that's the beauty of it. And so you have to know through real serious study, what is it that makes music beautiful? And, so how do we learn that? We listen to records and we find perhaps masters, our forebears in jazz who, let's say there's a beautiful solo you like. Well, you transcribe it, you learn it. It's like learning that language. You're never going to try to play the whole solo in exactly that order and everything, but you sort of start to call vocabulary from it, much like a young child. I mean, none of us learned our native language from a book. We all learned it from listening and trying to copy. And so that's really what it is with jazz music. But then at the same time, I studied counterpoint and all of that. So I also was learning and continue to learn, honestly, how the musical elements fit together, rhythm and harmony and melody and form and texture, how they all fit together to make good music. And then when you're in a group setting in jazz, now you have to be listening. And if one of your colleagues plays something, you should play something in reaction to that. You don't want to play the same thing back at that person, really. That's sort of an amateurish thing to do. But you do want to play something pertinent to what they just said. And so it becomes this beautiful conversation, really. So much of what the explanation for what a jazz musician does is very much like talking about human interaction via conversation, right? Um, I don't know if any of you have had the experience, but I've spent, a lot of time traveling around the world playing music, and nothing can make you feel dumber than having some thought and trying to feed it through your real elementary understanding of a language. You find yourself really having to not just simplify what you're trying to say, but you find that you don't really have the skill to say exactly what it is, particularly if what you're thinking at the time is of any nuance, right? So that's what we try to do. We just try to build up our understanding of what exactly the music needs now and know how to do it, right? So you have your musical instinct, and then you try to uh, give your musical instinct voice by virtue of developing skills, technical skills, and otherwise. One of the things that was really formative in my youth was the ability to play at church. I grew up in a Pentecostal church back home in Niagara Falls, and if anyone knows anything about Pentecostal churches, there's a lot of emotion involved, right? So I would play in church, and it was lovely because people had very open hearts, you know. So I learned pretty early on that music is not just something on a page, or it's not just something you're thinking, that you lay out on the keyboard or whatever your instrument is, or if you're a singer. It's ab- actually a way to put your hand on people's hearts, and in fact, a way to open your own heart. And so there becomes this communion between one and the listeners. And I don't think either of us is more important, frankly. Anyway, so I did that, through I got till I got out of high school. I said I went to music school, and while I was at music school, there was a kind of a hippie church, and I knew they had a great band. And so I went and eventually started playing with that band. And they were good musicians, guys from the and gals from the music building where I was studying. And I met there a fellow who was attending that church. He's an African American guy from Brooklyn, originally from Brooklyn. And we became fast friends. In fact, he was my big brother in a college fraternity. So he was a couple years my senior. So he graduated. I stayed in school, finished my degree. And upon graduation, I was like, okay, now what? I'd started to learn about jazz. I had a pretty good handle on things. I mean, for a kid my age, right? I was, 23 or something when I moved to New York. Fed myself into the teeth of New York City. And around that time, my buddy moved back to Brooklyn. He had gone down to the Morehouse College of Religion in Atlanta and became a minister. So he was working as assistant pastor. Some of you may know the great Concord Baptist Church in Brooklyn, where Gardner C. Taylor was the pastor for many, many years. He was a very important personage in that world. Dean of American Pastors, he was often, preachers, he was often known as. Worked with King and was a very important person, but what a preacher. This guy was amazing. Anyway, so my friend Frederick Annette, Reverend Frederick Annette, started to invite me. They would give him little things to do, like plan a special afternoon of music or whatever. And so he would bring me in, and I started writing music that I thought was evocative of various things, the Psalms or whatever, without words though. Sort of descriptive of, the battle at Jericho or little David and Goliath and all that, so it was fun because I started to, develop my compositional chops. Anyway, so Frederick eventually got his own church, and asked me to come in and work out a little bit with the choir. So I did, and it was sort of on a, ad hoc basis. Well, I need you this week, et cetera. And I did that for a few weeks. And then I started to realize this is the way I always wanted these hymns to sound. You know, I grew up in this church, which a beautiful church, was wonderful. The people were warm, as I've already described, but they weren't hearing the hymns like I was hearing them, because the music I was listening to was Sly and the Family Stone, The Temptations, James Brown, etc. So, I wanted to put that thing on the hymns, but, it wasn't going to work. So finally, I'm here at this church in Brooklyn. It was called the DeVoe Street Baptist Church. It's in Williamsburg. And I'm like, yeah, this is kind of cool. So I stayed there as minister of music for 18 years, and it completely changed my life. There was a wonderful choir there, and I got to direct the choir. And, I and my wife, Jody Sandhouse, who has since passed away, a wonderful singer, we were just welcomed into that church. If you've been to a Black church, you know just what I mean. I mean, there's no more home feeling. It's truly beautiful. And then we had a son, and I raised him in that church, and he started playing drum set with me when he turned around 8 or 9 or so. And it was just wonderful, So I did that for like 18 years. And with that choir, I started to write music, and I would use the Psalms as text, and then write 4-part harmonies and, come up with tunes. And we actually made a couple records. One was called Joyful. I did another one called the 23rd. No, it's called the Good Shepherd Suite, based on the 23rd Psalm. And for that, I wrote for big band and choir. So that's been a really important part of my life. Then I got an invitation to go try out for a great gig as pianist and conductor at a Reformed Jewish temple in Scarsdale. So I'm like, geez, I don't know about this, right? I don't know anything about this. So I went and found that, guess what? The people there had the same open hearts, great musicians there. So all I had to do was kind of, I guess, get a feeling for what that music was, and then arrange it. And they commissioned me to write a few pieces, in Hebrew, but it's the same thing, right? It's music of the soul, music of the heart. Again, if you open your heart and let the audience know you're there for them, or the congregation, it'll work. But it took me a minute. I remember being at the church one time in the DeVoe Street Church, and we're rocking, and the choir is just beautiful. They're just swinging. And, I'm doing my thing. My son is, taking care of business at the drums. And I'm like, this feels so good. And I haven't thought once about what to play. But it sounds great. It feels right. I said, well, why then, when I go on the bandstand, am I worried about, do I sound sufficiently like I know what I'm doing, And it occurred to me, well, because when I'm at church, and now when I'm at the temple, I also play at a church in Pound Ridge Community Church now. But when I'm in those settings, I'm just acting as vessel, right? Receiving the music and giving it, right? It's the only thing, really. Your talents or your gifts are the only things that you must re-gift. You don't keep it for yourself. It's not really yours anyway, and we can go into all kinds of discussions about where talent comes from, depending on your philosophical, spiritual, or religious bent. You may have opinions on that, but it doesn't really matter. The point is, it's not yours to keep, So I kind of started to try to bring that out onto the bandstand when I perform. And if you've ever seen me work, you know that I talk to the audience and I just let them know, hey, this is for you. We could do this in a practice room, but it doesn't feel as good. Why? Because you're not there. So I encourage my audience to react. That's the other great thing about the black church, man, that I wish everyone would figure out. If the music's good, you're supposed to exhort the band or whoever, go ahead, it's beautiful. I like that. If it's not happening, I feel kind of funny. I feel like, geez, don't they know I love them? So so I kind of try to make a point. I don't beat them over the head with it, but I do try to make the point to the audience that yes, this is for you, and they react really well. Now, during COVID, this is where I sat for 5 or 6 hours a day during COVID, right here at my piano. And I was playing Bach, because to me, another church musician, Bach was the original bebopper. I mean, if you check out his music, it can be analyzed vertically. This chord goes to that chord, et cetera, but it all flows in voices, right? So it's imagine like a school of fish swimming along. They're doing their thing, and all of a sudden, like a beam of sunlight comes down, and illuminates where all the fish are at any one given moment. Well, okay, that's a chord, let's say, but then they keep swimming, and then they meet up here again, and that's another chord. But the music flows horizontally, not vertically, right? Music is not a photograph; it's a movie, you know. So studying studying Bach to the extent that I did during COVID really sort of reinforced that with me. Not to mention all those hours a day at the instrument really got me feeling pretty fly there. So now that we're back out playing again, I really am feeling free, and I'm feeling like, at least I'm being a good steward of my gift, and so then it's worth sharing. Coming out of COVID, the performance thing had kind of started up a little bit again. And I decided it was time to make a new recording, a trio record. Because I've made quartet records and solo piano records and trio records, and I made a duo record, pardon me, with a great violinist. We played tangos and stuff on it, Juliet Kurtzman. I've done I wrote for big band, did all that stuff, but the trio is kind of what I really have done most of. So I made these arrangements of the music of Leonard Bernstein. I had, oh, thanks, Alexa. She says she likes the record. So you're the one. Anyway, so I had made all these arrangements because I had written a 4-horn book of Leonard Bernstein's music for his centenary year. And it featured Joe Lovano on. It was great, but it was kind of a one-off, right? I mean, how easy is it to book 8 pieces somewhere? Not too easy. So most of my playing, gigs is in trio setting. So I started to work that music out on trio dates. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to go into the studio and do this. And I did. We went into Rudy Van Gelder's studio, and the bassist Ugonna Okegwo, wonderful musician and a dear friend that I play with a lot. He's the bassist on the record. And then I asked to join us a great drummer from the West Coast, whom I knew sort of tangentially. My first recording was a trio record with Mel Lewis and Dennis Irwin, recorded at Van Gelder's. And Jeff Hamilton we kind of became pen pals because Mel was a mentor of his. And so we kind of became pen pals. We'd see each other at conferences and festivals and stuff. So I thought, I'm going to call Jeff and see if he wants to do it. And he did. He flew out here and we made the record. We made a couple rehearsals, and then, played some gigs about 4 or 5 days in a row. And then we went in and made the record. And going back to what I was talking about before, about the stronger and richer your vocabulary becomes, the more able you are to have conversation in the moment, right? and not just be able to talk, but really to be able to get someplace in your conversation. You know what I mean? You've been in conversations with people where you really feel enlightened, illuminated, something. You really feel like you got across what you were thinking, and you were fed by what your partner in conversation had to say. And that's like exactly what I felt like what was happening in the studio that day. These two musicians, Ugana Okegwo and Jeff Hamilton, are very generous musicians, big ears, and know everything they can do on their instruments. So that when we were playing, it was real free and loose, and everything was really beautiful. And the musicians listening will know what I mean when I say this is the first record I've made that I can actually listen to pretty close to having made it. Other stuff I got to wait years, until you forget what you were trying to do. Right. But this thing, I really like listening to it. It's called On the Town. Pete Malinverni plays Leonard Bernstein. It came out on, I think, January, a couple of weeks ago, February, whatever it was. Came out a few weeks ago. And it's on Planet Arts label, which is a wonderful small label run by a guy named Tom Bellino, who's a very soulful person. But I'm really excited about listening to it and hearing that kind of conversation that happens. And I picked a great composer's music to play with, right? Because Leonard Bernstein, he has this ability to write simple things. Right? Sol, do. Very simple stuff. But then there's all this really beautiful formal and harmonic thing happening underneath it. So there's a lot of fodder there for us to play with, for me to have thought about as for arrangements. And then, you bring in these two master musicians, and we go into we rehearsed and then played the gigs and then went into the studio, agreeing to agree. Nobody was trying to make themselves sound good. The whole thing was about making each other sound good. And that, I think, is the key. Develop your skills, try to make your colleagues sound as well as possible. And always remember that music is to be shared. We are to evoke and express feeling and share that. And I kind of think that's the answer to a lot of the questions we face in the world. That's why I really appreciate Gal doing this, and Milan today for helping out. It's important that we get a chance to talk about what we think is really important. I'm blessed, because I play at that church. I play at the temple, Westchester Reformed Temple, and I'm chair of jazz studies at SUNY Purchase. So I'm really blessed in that way, that I worked hard enough through the years that these opportunities came, and I've been able to hang on to the jobs, right, and keep the gigs. So I'm fortunate in that I can make artistic choices because I believe they're the right choice to make. And, so I hope if you do, you have a chance to listen to the record. I hope you'll like it, and you'll, maybe if you get it or get a chance to listen to it, you'll listen for that kind of conversational interplay. And it's my hope that listening to that conversational interplay can maybe encourage each of us to do that just on a regular walking around daily basis. That's what we're here for. We're here to connect. We look for miracles in the world, Do miracles really happen? Well, okay, I lost my mom about a week and a half ago. And yet I still have joy because I had lunch yesterday with an old friend, the great drummer Leroy Williams, right? That's a miracle. If I put my finger here, this note's going to come out. That's a miracle. The fact that you all are there, that's a miracle. And so I guess that's my message. That's just I try to let people know there are miracles through what I do, through playing and through teaching and writing and arranging and all that stuff. And it's up to each of us to do the same. So I really want to thank everyone who has said all these beautiful things. Somebody is a parent of one of our guitar students at Purchase. Man, if you know anybody who's thinking about going to school for jazz music, look me up. Let's talk, because I'm very proud of the strong faculty, including Alexis Cole, who just typed in. And we've got a good thing going on. Our students are mutually supportive of each other. And, anyway, thanks so much. And I really wish you all the best. Go to my website, PeteMalinverni.com. Look me up, write me a note, say hello. Bye.